In most NDE cases, they can't cross past a certain point. However, today's guest not only crossed past that point, but was given a full-on tour. And John Davis is here today to talk about it. Welcome to Soul Spy University, where your souls can run free and your minds are free to expand. John Davis's stories is one of my most favorite accounts of the other side ever told, to the point where I literally covered it in one of my earliest videos titled Tour of the Other Side. So I'm super excited for you guys to now hear it firsthand from John himself. But first, every subscriber means the world to me. If you haven't already, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing to be a part of our family so I can keep existing to put out this content for you. And there is a link in the description box in case anybody gets anything out of this at all and would like to support me in further making this content for you. My heart is truly grateful from the inside out to even have you here. And John, I am so grateful to have you here today, alive and well with us. So grateful, unbelievably grateful. You have no idea. So wherever you'd like to start, John, I love having you here.
Thank you, Christine. I just want to say thank you so much for inviting me. I love sharing my story. It's one of hope, and it just gives us all so much to look forward to. So thank you for having me as a guest.
Oh, awesome.
And feel free to interrupt me with any questions you have. I'll just go and I'll share my story with your audience. My story began, I was 21. It was in 1987. And what I'd like to tell people, first of all, is that a lot of times you hear about people who've had near-death experiences and they come back with some kind of gift or ability. Like they might be able to compose music, or they can hear people who've passed over. I didn't have anything like that. The only thing I did come back with, though, was I have 100% recall of everything that happened, everything I saw, everything they told me. I remember it just like it happened yesterday. Even though it was all these years ago, it's still fresh in my mind. So I think that has to be my gift that came from God. Because normally I can't remember what I had for dinner last night. So my memory is bad, but in this situation, I remember everything. So that's one thing I like to say, just to let people know that I still have full recall of everything I saw. So what started this whole process was my dad was in sales, and he won a contest where he received 2 mopeds, or nowadays we call scooters. And we used to ride them all the time. And one day I was out riding and I had an accident and I crashed into a tree. And the way I landed is I tore the tendons off my right hand, and I needed to go and have surgery. Well, I had never had surgery before. I had hardly ever even been in a hospital before. So I didn't know what to expect. So the day of the surgery, I go in and they start to give me the anesthesia. And I had an allergic reaction and my heart stopped. And that's where this whole thing unfolded. Is right after that is where NDE began. So after I died, the very next second, I woke up and I was in the most beautiful building I've ever seen. It was huge. It was this long white marble building that went down so far I couldn't see the end. And my very first thought was, oh my God, I had no idea the hospital was this big, because I didn't know what was going on. But it was everything that they showed me was made of this beautiful white marble. And on my left-hand side, in my left ear, I heard, "My name is Alan. I'm your spirit guide." Well, at the time this happened, I had never heard of spirit guides before. This was 1987. Nobody had talked about this. But what I want to say is that my spirit guide, we all have them, and they help us plan our lifetimes, and they're with us in our lifetime when we come to Earth to help us accomplish what we wanted to accomplish. So he showed me, he took me on this whirlwind tour, and he first of all took me to the outside of every building that I saw, and then took me to the inside. So everything I can describe for your listeners is something that he showed me. And this first building I was in looked like, and your listeners can Google this. There's a temple in Turkey. It's called the Temple of Artemis, 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 and it looks almost exactly what the building that I was in looks like. Beautiful long corridor. On the right-hand side were these 30-foot marble columns, just like you see in Greece or in Rome, but they're beautiful white marble. All the way down, they were maybe 5 feet apart. And in the middle of this building, there were these marble white, gorgeous tables, and they were square. And each side had a marble seat, again going as far down as you could see. And there were two people sitting at every table, and I'll tell you who they were in just a minute. And this was probably the most magical part of this. On the left hand side, to the left of all these different tables, were these doorways, or what I know now is that they're tunnels, and they were perfectly cut out of the marble, and they corresponded to each table. So, and they were about 5 feet apart. So you had the columns, then you had these tables, and then you had these tunnels. And my guide was telling me everything I was seeing. So I was just going with the flow. And he told me that these tunnels are what people come from Earth to the other side. This is how they make the transition. They come through these tunnels. And where I was, and this is the part that I still don't understand how they did it, but you know how the typical near-death experience you read about or you hear about people who they might have some kind of an accident, or they're in the hospital and they die and they float above their bodies, they can look down and they see themselves, and then they become aware of a tunnel, and at the other end of the tunnel is a white light. That's a lot of times how people describe their NDE. Well, for some reason, and I don't know how they did this, I didn't have any of that. They they took me to the other side of the white light. So when people go into the light, they finish their lifetimes. They can't come back. So I think that's why a lot of times we have never heard what's on the other side of that white light. Where I was, the building that I was in is called the Orientation Center. And as soon as people come through the light, they're in this building that I was in. And the people that were at these tables, they're called orientation counselors. And their job is to help people who transition from Earth after they passed away back to the other side. And the reason that they're there is so many times when we come into a lifetime, we forget where we're from. We're really from the other side, or people call heaven, people call the afterlife. They happen to call it the other side. And that's where they come from after they finish a lifetime on Earth. So here's how it works. My guide told me to look at the next tunnel. So I looked over, and a gentleman was coming through this tunnel. And he was an elderly man, maybe in his 80s or his 90s. And he had his right hand holding his chest. And my guide said he died of a heart attack. And this woman, the woman that was closest to him, she stood up, this orientation counselor. She walked over and she took his hands in hers and she led him back to the table, and they sat down, and she held his hands the entire time she was talking to him. And I could see her talking, but I was too far away to hear what she was saying. But in just what she was saying was that you finished your lifetime, you're back home now on the other side. And what happens is they start to remember where they're from and who they really are. And my guide said, watch him. So as I watched him, the most amazing thing happened. He began to change back into a man in his early 30s. And again, I don't know why this is, but everybody on the other side is in their 30s. And I don't know if that's because Jesus died in his 30s. I have no idea why, but that's how everybody appears to be. So he changed, and he remembered where he was from, and he stood up and he walked off to the right between these columns, and he stepped down 3 steps into what I can only describe as the most beautiful, ornate gardens I've ever seen. They're kind of like, you know what the gardens look like in England? They're really manicured, just beautiful. That's what these gardens looked like. And what happens is once you come through the tunnel, you have your little orientation session, you go to the right, and you have what's called a reunion in these gardens. And everybody in your life who passed before you is there. Your parents, maybe grandparents, nieces, nephews, uncles, even children. Everybody is there to greet you. And here's the thing that I learned, that it's a big deal when you finish a lifetime on Earth.
Mm.
And the reason being, and we'll talk about this in just a little bit later too, but the reason being is that Earth is the hardest of all the planets. And coming here is a huge accomplishment. So when you get back, everybody is there to greet you. And it's just an extraordinary and I can't wait to see what this man went through. Everybody was there, they were hugging him, they were applauding, it was just a really happy event. And all of us get to have the reunion. So that was the first building. And the next place he took me to, and I think this is what happens with the natural process of how it unfolds when you cross over. You have the reunion, you have the orientation, the reunion, and then you have what is called a life review. And he took me to a building that was kind of rectangle. And on all 4 sides were these beautiful columns, again, marble white columns. And it's kind of like the Acropolis in Greece. All these buildings were beautiful white marble. And where I was only a small part of the other side, but it was an area where I think a lot of learning takes place because it was full of people. There were people everywhere, just a really busy environment. So he took me to what's called a life review. And we walked in, and the building that I was inside was round, like it was circular. And it was almost like being inside of a movie theater. But instead of having just one screen up front, it had screens up on the top, all around in a circle. So everywhere that I looked up on the top, there were movie screens. And my guide said, "This is where we do life reviews." And all of a sudden, every screen lit up like it was playing a movie, but it was playing episodes of my lifetime up to that point. And one screen had me as a baby, another screen had me as an infant, another one had me as a toddler. Then when I was in elementary school, when I was in junior high, in high school, as a young adult, and all of them were playing at the same time. And he said the reason that we have life reviews is it's there to see if we accomplished what we wanted to accomplish when we came into life. All of us come into life for a certain reason. We come in to learn, to experience, to grow, and they play these screens for you so you can see how you did. So that was called the life review. He took me to another building, and this one looked the same. It had columns outside, all around in a square, but this one was a little bit different. This one looked like what we would say is a typical movie theater, and it had one screen in front. Now, what he was going to show me next was something that was really controversial for me at the time because I was raised a Catholic. We used to go to church, 2 or 3 times a week, and then on Sundays. So we were very indoctrinated with Catholicism. So what he was showing me were past lifetimes. And he showed me 3 of them. The first one was I was a monk, and I had a shaved head, and I was wearing a red gown, and I was in a monastery. And my job in that lifetime was to teach kids about living in a monastery. The next one he showed me was I was a shoe peddler, and I had a wheelbarrow, and I had shoes in this wheelbarrow. And my job in that little community was I fixed people's shoes. The next life he took me to, or he showed me, was of a fisherman. And I was on a lake in a little old raggedy wooden boat, and I had nets. And my job in that lifetime was to help feed the village or the community that I was in. And every time he took me to one of these different buildings, my guide, he wanted me to understand what actually happens on the other side. That we do have an orientation, we do have a reunion, we have a life review. And he wanted me to tell people that past lifetimes really are real. And we can have as many lifetimes as we want. And some people have asked me, do we have to come back? And the answer is no. We are the only ones that decide if we want to come back or not. So that was the past life review part. And I just thought that was amazing because I was never told that growing up. So that was neat. The next one he took me to, this building was quite a bit different. On the outside, it was a big, huge, round building. And I can't overemphasize how large these things were. All of these buildings were just enormous. I don't think there's even anything on earth to compare them to. They were just huge. And this one was round. And again, it had columns, white marble columns all around the outside, and it had a huge dome on it. It wasn't a flat roof. This one had a big dome. And this building, he told me, is where we go to plan our lifetimes. And I don't know why we go to this particular place on the other side, but it's where we go to plan our lifetimes. And our guides help us plan our lives. So he wanted me to know that this building is where we go to plan lifetimes. And he took me to a marble table. And on the table were these two scrolls. You know what? Have you ever seen like papyrus paper? Like you might think of ancient Egypt. That's what these looked like. And there were two of them. One had a blue ribbon and the other had a red ribbon. I don't know why there were two or what the ribbons represented, but I picked up the one that had a blue ribbon and I took it off and I unrolled the scroll on this table. And I could see it was full of writing and it looked like calligraphy. You know how old calligraphy, you had the pen, you dipped it in the ink well, and you wrote, that's what these looked like. And what these were is that's where you actually plan your lifetime. And you plan things in detail, like what country you're going to be born into, who your parents are going to be, what lessons do you want to learn, where you're going to go to school, what language are you going to learn, even things like what you're going to do for a living in that lifetime. All of it is planned on these scrolls. Well, as I went to try to read it, it folded up. So I wasn't able to read anything about my life because that might invalidate what I had come to learn if I knew ahead of time what I was supposed to go through. So they wanted me to know that we can't read them when we're in life, only when you get back. And just then, I looked over to my left, and there was this huge, massive window. And outside, I could see people. And this was the first time that I really saw people. And where I was on the other side was a hub of activity. There were people everywhere. And a lot of times people wear like tunics or gowns. And the best way I can describe it is kind of what they wore in ancient Greece. And I asked in my mind, I wonder why they're dressed like that. And my guide said, because that's the most comfortable. But people wear anything. I saw people who were wearing jeans and a t-shirt. It's totally up to them. And then on the other side of where these people were walking, there was a lake. And it was the most beautiful lake I have ever seen. More pristine and perfect than anything you could possibly imagine seeing. And it looked like glass. It was so perfect. And all around this lake, there were these weeping willow trees. You know, the ones that they flow down and all their leaves were just floating in the lake. It was just beautiful. And they wanted me to know that nature is very much a part of the other side. Just like we have nature here on Earth, nature is there also. So you can hike, you can go camping, do anything you want to do on the other side also, especially with nature. So that was a big part of that part too. So that was where, oh, I wanted to, before I forget, I want to tell your listeners this too.
Mhm.
Have you ever heard the term soulmate?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay. I had never heard that back when I was 21. I didn't even know what that meant.
Yeah.
But they wanted me to know that we really do have soulmates, and they were created with us at creation, and they are our perfect mates that we have for eternity, because we never die. We live forever. That's how God created us. And he created us with perfect mates. But many times they don't come with you into your lifetime on this planet,
Okay.
because one of the things we come in for is to learn. And how we learn many times is through relationships.
Mhm.
And if you had a perfect relationship on earth, you probably wouldn't learn everything you could learn.
Mhm.
So usually what happens is the soulmate is with you on the other side, but not when you come into a lifetime. And here's what they wanted to show me. He took me to another area that looked like a library. And there are a lot of libraries on the other side. There's a huge emphasis on learning. And I think God created us with this hard wiring to want to learn and to grow and to develop, because that's a huge part of the other side is learning. So it took me to this area on in the same building, and there were bookshelves, lines and lines of bookshelves, and all the books looked similar, and they looked like Encyclopedia Britannicas. And he took me to an area, and I looked at this book, and there was writing. All these books have writing on the outside binding, and it looks like it's in the color of gold. And instead of the writing going across horizontal, the writing was vertical. And the book that I was looking at said Nina, Nina.
Mhm.
And what that turned out to be was that's the name of my soulmate. And all of us had these. So anything that you wanted to learn about your soulmate are in these books, like all their different lifetimes, what they learned, what their gifts were, everything that they wanted to accomplish, everything is in these books. And ours is there also. But he wanted me to know that, everybody has soulmates. So even if you feel like you never found your mate in your lifetime, your mate, your perfect mate's on the other side, and we all have them. So that was that building. It was just extraordinary to see all that. And here's one of my favorite parts that he took me to next. He took me to the outside of what I can only describe as it looked like a stadium, like a huge football stadium, but just enormous. So again, he showed me the outside, and then he took me to the inside, and it was full of just thousands and thousands of seats. And I was there by myself and my guide, and there was nobody else there. It was just me. And all the lights were on. It was super bright. And he told me that where I was inside a planetarium. And I don't know if a lot of your listeners have been to a planetarium, but it's a building where you go and they can show you on the ceiling different planets and stars and things like that. So as I was there was a man behind me, and his job was he ran this planetarium. And what's interesting too about the other side is that people have jobs there, but they're not like we have jobs here on Earth. We have to have jobs here to pay bills. You got to pay, your rent, your mortgage, utilities, insurance, all of that. But on the other side, people do jobs because they love what they do.
Mhm.
Like in the orientation center, those counselors, they loved being orientation counselors. So that's what they did. The gentleman that was behind me in the planetarium, he loved to run this. So this is what he did on the other side. And all of a sudden, he said, "Let's begin." All the lights went off. It was pitch black, and I sat down. And and he said to me, "When you look at the stars, this is what you see." And what he was referring to was that people on Earth, at our level of development and our level of knowledge, this is what we see. And he started showing me our solar system, like Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, Uranus, all of our solar system planets showed up, including our sun. And then they vanished. And then he said, when we look at the stars, this is what we see. And he was referring to everybody on the other side with their level of knowledge and their level of development. This is what they see. And he started showing me planet after planet after planet. First, there were dozens, then hundreds, then thousands, and then millions of planets. They were red, blue, green, yellow. Some planets had oceans, some were just deserts. And he wanted me to know that he said there is far more life in the universe than you can possibly know. And what they wanted me to know and to share was that Earth is not the only inhabited planets, or not the only inhabited planet. There are millions of other worlds that have life on them. And the other thing that was so extraordinary is that you can have a lifetime on any of them. It's not just Earth that you have a lifetime on. And again, they wanted me to know that you don't have to come into lifetimes at all. There are many people on the other side who don't want to come to Earth because it's so hard here. Earth has one of the most unique schematics in terms of evolution because there are still wars here. There is still poverty and violence and ignorance and hunger. And none of those things exist on the other side. And one thing I wanted to share with your audience too, and I don't know where this came from, but a lot of people think that we don't have bodies on the other side, but we do. Everybody I saw has form. And just like I'm looking at you, they look just like we do. But they're, of course, the bodies are different. They're somehow kind of made of energy, solid energy that it's stronger. The bodies are stronger. They're lighter. They don't age. They don't get sick, and they're like perfect bodies. So that's one thing I always like to tell people, that we do have bodies on the other side. So that was the planetarium, and I think that was one of my favorite parts because I love astronomy. I remember when I was in college, I signed up for an astronomy class, but I had to drop it because it was so hard for me. I did not understand how to calculate the distance of planets and stars. It was, as much as I loved it, I just could not understand it, how to do all the math. So I ended up dropping it. But I've always had this fascination with astronomy. And this part that he showed me about the planets was just so extraordinary to think that, and I think a lot of us know intuitively that there is no way in the world that Earth is the only inhabited planet. There are millions, and we are only in one small little galaxy called the Milky Way. And the universe is so vast and so large that, of course, there's other life out there. There just has to be. God didn't just create this one planet.
Yeah.
So that was the planetarium. I thought that was one of my favorite parts. The next thing he took me to was, this one was the biggest building so far, and it was rectangle as far as you could see. There was no end to this building, and it didn't have marble columns on the sides. It had marble columns out front, huge white marble columns, and it looked like, have you ever seen our Supreme Court Justice Building?
Yeah.
What it looks like? It looked like that, with the columns up front and all of these stairs, or all of these marble steps leading up to the top, kind of like the Parthenon in Greece. It looked just like that. So I walked in, and it was a library, huge 30-foot, 30, 25, 30-foot bookshelves with books. As far as you could see were these bookcases with books. And it was a hub of activity. There were people looking for books. There were people studying at tables. People were talking. There were people everywhere. And it was a library. And at the time, I didn't know what this significance of this library meant. But years later, as I shared my story more and more, people said they think what I saw was what's called the Akashic records. And apparently what that is kind of like a library of God's mind, and everything is there. So anything that you wanted to learn about, you could go to this library and look it up. So my guide took me to the left-hand side of this building, of this library. And on the left-hand side were these rooms. And you know how modern libraries have study rooms that you can reserve and you can go in and close the door and all that. And that's what this looked like. There were these different study rooms, and they were the size of about maybe a master bedroom in your home. And there was a woman in this one room, and she had her back to me. She was sitting on a couch, and she had jet black hair down to her waist. And she was watching what we would call today a flat screen TV that was mounted on the wall. And it was maybe 50 inches, 60 inches. It was pretty big. And she was watching a battle that took place between the Native American Plains tribes and the United States cavalry 200 years ago. And I thought, oh, maybe she's just watching a movie. But my guide said she is watching actual history. And I remember thinking, how can she be watching history when back then on Earth's history, we didn't have video cameras? How could she be watching this? And my guide said, everything gets recorded. So everything in your lifetime, everything you go through, everything you experience, it's somehow recorded. And I have no idea how that works, but it's kind of like a God thing. I don't know how it's recorded, but even when you have your life review, everything you do is recorded, so you can look at it and view it. So in this library, the reason these rooms exist is anything you want to learn about, you can go and watch history. You can see World War I. You could go see the Titanic. You could, anything you wanted to learn about, you can go to these rooms. And this is where they emphasized, or my guide emphasized, that learning is forever. You never stop learning. And we are eternal. There is no end to us. We exist for eternity. So that was a neat part, was seeing the library, because I love history. It's one of my favorite things. And to be able to go to the other side and see living history, I think is going to be such an amazing thing to be able to do. So that was a neat part. The next place he took me to was a castle. And this castle was huge, a beautiful, perfect looking castle. And they told me that everything on Earth was first on the other side. So the pyramids existed on the other side first. The castles existed on the other side first. All the Roman buildings, the Greek buildings existed on the other side first. And that's where people here on Earth got their inspiration from. Their ideas to build something like the Acropolis or the Parthenon. It came from the other side. So this building was a castle built with stone. And my guide told me to walk in. And the first thing I noticed immediately, there was a red carpet, just a beautiful, ornate, bright red carpet that was on the floor. And there were these huge walls on my right and on my left. And what was on these walls were life-size paintings of people. And the people that were there were people that had lived in that castle during that time period. They had a painting of what they looked like, and they had the paintings looked of what they dressed like, what they wore. And in front of each one of these paintings were podiums. And on the podiums were books. And what this was, the books contained information about that person's life, what they call royalty at that time, that the kings or the queens, everybody had a book, and it was their lifetime. So if you wanted to learn about a particular era or a particular person in medieval Europe, you could go to this place on the other side and see the castles that people lived in and you could read about their lifetime, what they were like, what they learned, what decisions they made, even conversations are in this book. Right about then, I looked off to my right, and in castles, they have circular stairways that went up to one level to the next, and they weren't stairs like we have now, but they were all circular, kind of like in a circle. And there was a woman who was walking down, and she had strawberry blonde hair, and she was wearing kind of like a peach or an orange kind of a tunic or a gown. And she walked up to me and she said, "Is there anything I can help you find?" And even today, Christina, this is something that I still kick myself for. You know what I said to her? I said, "Oh, no, thanks. I'm just looking."
Yeah.
And I think, how ridiculous was that? Because I could have asked this girl anything.
Yeah.
I was supposed to be having surgery to fix my hand,
Yeah.
and here I am on the other side. I died. I'm having this experience that my guide is taking me to, and I could have asked her anything,
Yeah.
but I didn't. I didn't know what to say.
Well, just so you know, I hate to interrupt. We have 2
Yeah.
minutes before Zoom cuts us off. But I just want
Okay.
to chime in, and then guys, catch us in part 2 of this, because I would never want his story to be unfinished. It's just too precious. But to add to what you're saying, John, every time you mention that in your story, I think it's absolutely hilarious. To me, it's an automated response from every time we're in a store on Earth.
You know
Where,
what? That's exactly right.
you
Because I
know,
was thinking, when I go to a clothing store,
yeah,
I say the exact same thing. "Oh, no, thanks. I'm just looking."
exactly. As soon as you
Yeah.
said that, I'm just like, oh, it's okay. Don't beat yourself up. Because every time any of us are in a store, really, hey, can I help you with anything? Oh, no, just looking. It's
Yeah,
just an
exactly.
automated Earth
Exactly.
response.
And
Um,
my guide told me that what this girl loves to do on the other side is she is what we would call a historian. So anything that you wanted to learn about, if you wanted to learn about medieval Europe, you could go to the castle, you could read these people's books, but you could also talk to her and ask her anything, because that's what she loves to do on the other side.
that's
So
amazing.
that was that
Okay, guys, more on this in part 2 coming right up. Zoom's about to kick us off. I'll see you in a couple minutes, John.
part. Okay.
But just to wrap up, guys, yeah, so much more in part 2. The rest of the story, questions. I just would never want to interrupt this amazing, amazing story, which is why I haven't asked any questions yet. But yeah, catch us soon, guys. Can't wait to see you. All right, see you soon, John. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, bye.